Welcome to First and Future Live, a bi-weekly program of the Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State University. We are glad to have you. My name is Leslie Boney, and I'm the director of the Institute for Emerging Issues. This is a program about the people and places and policies and programs that are shaping North Carolina right now. Every other week, we take on key issues that are facing the state, and we bring in the people who know about them, are working on them, and are trying to do what they can to make them better. We're really grateful to you for being part of these programs. You are an important part of this program, and you have the opportunity to participate through the comments and questions section, whether you are watching live on YouTube or Facebook Live or LinkedIn. We're glad to have our LinkedIn viewers this time. Please lob in your questions via comments or questions, and we will get to as many of them as possible. Some of you are going to be listening to a taped version of this, either from our website at emergingissues.org, where we have all of our programs. Others of you are going to be watching this over a podcast feed or over our YouTube channel. We welcome all of you and welcome your comments. This is a program that we've been doing for 3 or 4 months now, and during that time, we've taken on a number of issues, the question of racial equity and criminal justice, which both the General Assembly and the Governor's Office are working on and trying to make progress on. We've looked at the role of HBCUs going forward in our state and how they can help with our recovery. We've looked at learning recovery and learning loss and talked to the people who are trying to figure out how we can make sure that our students recover as quickly as possible from the challenges of COVID-19. Today, we take on small business, a critical part of our state's economy, and we talk with 3 of the people who are thinking about that every day and trying to figure out what we can do to help small business and make a full comeback from the pandemic. We're joined today by Dr. Henry McCoy, who is the Director of Entrepreneurship at North Carolina Central University, by Kevin Price, the President and CEO of and by Byron Hicks, the Executive Director of the Small Business Technology Development Center, or SBTDC. Gentlemen, thanks to you all for joining us.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you. Let me just start by making sure folks have a little bit of the data about what's been happening with small businesses, and we'll fill that in over the course of today's program. But let me start with a recent survey by Facebook and small business, the Small Business Roundtable. This is from February, so a couple of months old, but I think the data is relatively accurate. And it basically supports the idea that there really have been some layoffs in small business. If this survey found that 27% of those surveyed had reduced their workforce, and out of that 27%, 48% said they'd reduced their workforce by half or more. Again, among those who've reduced workforce, 51% said they were not planning to rehire those laid off. So that's one data point. A second one from that same survey is looking at the percentage that have closed. So 22% of small and medium-sized businesses have closed during the pandemic. That's not as big a number as you might think. There's always a lot of churn among small and medium-sized businesses, but it is more than we typically have. And if you look at those businesses that have closed, a greater percentage of those are minority-led, a greater percentage of those are female-led. One other data point I'll just talk about, and if you haven't gone to this yet, it's from a group called Opportunity Insights. And what they find is that in North Carolina, over the past year, compared to January of 2020, small business revenues in North Carolina down about 24.5%. So lots of challenges to lots of businesses in North Carolina. Byron, let me turn to you first and just ask you why it has been so hard on small businesses over the past year. I know that sounds like an obvious question,
Wow.
but if you could just give me just kind of a sense of the range of factors small businesses have been facing.
Well, I think the biggest challenge in this was the uncertainty all along. Back in, before I came to the SBTDC, I owned my own grading and water and sewer construction company. When we hit the recession, No one knew what was going to happen. I think what was so crazy with the pandemic was it started out with, we thought it'd be a few months. I think the entire world, the nation, thought it would be a few months. And so all the things that were put in place to help businesses were more looking at the short term. How do we save businesses for 60 days? How do we save them for 90 days? Well, here we are. I think it was just the uncertainty, not knowing when they could open, if they could open. How long would this go? How much money do I need to have to survive? There was just too much uncertainty for the small businesses.
Kevin, you work a lot with women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses, and we just saw some data that shows that those businesses have been facing greater challenges over the past year. Can you talk a little bit about why that is and why those failure rates are higher among minority and women-owned businesses?
Well, Leslie, thank you, first of all, for the invitation to participate today. It's great to see some colleagues that I've worked with in the past, and we're on this journey together to support diverse businesses across the state. And I hope people understand that we work collaboratively together to support businesses across our state. And part of what I've seen in my career, I've been a commercial banker. I've been on the CRA and community development side of banking, and now in this role with the Institute. And what I am seeing consistently is that diverse businesses, that being minority and women-owned businesses in particular, tend to start their business undercapitalized, and it's very difficult to catch up. And so when you pre-pandemic have a business that's well undercapitalized, and to Byron's point, you go into a pandemic thinking this is going to be a short-term issue. So how do we get past a few months, and a few months turns into over a year, you start to see the threads unravel. And so here we are. I saw a Washington Post article that said that we've lost upwards of 30% of African-American businesses across the country. And I remember one of the secretaries for the state asking me, well, what do you think that means for the state? I said, well, I would guess we're on parity with that for the state. But the interesting thing also, Leslie, is that we saw a record number of new businesses, diverse businesses being created last year. So while we lost a record number, we also saw a record number being created. And some of that is people not wanting to return to the workforce and starting their business. What concerns me about that, that's great. It's a double-edged sword, because what's great about it is new businesses. But the challenge to that is, are they also starting out undercapitalized? And how do we position ourselves for the next pandemic, for the next crisis that occurs, so we're not in the same position again?
Henry, both Byron and Kevin have talked about the challenge of a pandemic that we didn't know the length of. And so we went into this thinking it's just going to be a couple of paychecks. It's going to be, we've got to figure out a way to get through a few paychecks and then we'll make it. And the federal government created this very large program called the Paycheck Protection Program. And hundreds of billions of dollars has been deployed through that. I'll just show a couple of data points about that. So far, the Paycheck Protection Program has deployed about $800 billion in forgivable loans, and specifically designed to help people make payroll, get through that. Varying estimates about how many jobs it has saved, but one estimate at least is that has kept 8 million jobs in place throughout the country. There are some new programs out there, one called the Restaurant Revitalization Fund that's obviously specifically for restaurants, another for shuttered venues, which mostly has to do with entertainment venues. So there is a lot of money out there. But you've taken a look at where those PPP loans have been going, and you looked at the early days, and just wanted to show your data that you put as you talk about it a little bit. But can you talk about how that money has gone out and any thoughts you have about why it's gone out the way it has.
Oh yeah, well, thank you, and again, I appreciate being here. And Kevin and Byron comments have been on point in terms of kind of where we are. The idea of going into the pandemic, thinking that this is going to be a quick turnaround. I think that's what we as as Americans think about, and probably the world now, this kind of globalized society. That hey, we're going to we're going to run against a challenge, and then we're going to kind of bounce right back so quickly. And I think that the policies that we saw early on kind of reflected that idea. Certainly, when you think about the payroll protection program, the idea was really to, as it says, protect payrolls, businesses that had employees, to keep those individuals employed, because it certainly was a time of so much uncertainty as it related to this idea of, okay, when will this turn around? And so, so many people were looking at, how do we make it through? Now, to answer your question, and this ties back into, again, some things that both Byron and Kevin said. Small businesses by nature, already, at a position where they don't have all of the access to the capital markets that say some of the major businesses have, right? They have to, rely on personal savings or loans or the credit of the entrepreneur and things of that nature. Then when you look at it from a standpoint of breaking it down to demographics, we know, women and minorities have, more challenges and access to capital, things of that nature. What we essentially saw with the payroll protection program was a program that was immediately put into place to try to keep folks on payroll. Now, we learned really early in the process that there were some major companies that access to capital, and folks questioned whether they actually needed the capital or not, Ruth Chris and some other places like that. But what I found when I looked at it, I did a analysis of the payroll protection program, probably in the summer of last year, see kind of where it went. And one of the things that we found was that certainly money hit the street, and it hit the street very fast. But part of the challenge with it get to minority businesses, and the chart that you showed, it essentially showed that when you look at kind of who owned businesses and what they look like across the United States, that the white businesses tended to get above kind of parity of where they were from a standpoint of economics. So it shows that the percentage of equity, if you look at the far right side of the screen, got about almost 40% more loans than they would have based on their population share, their business population share. Asian businesses got about 30% more, and African Americans, Hispanics, and American Indians got below parity, with African Americans at the bottom of that list getting basically only 14% of the loans through the PPP that they would have gotten or they should have gotten based on their actual size in the overall ecosystem. But I finish up like this. Essentially, part of this challenge is the fact that, as Kevin said, so many of these businesses are undercapitalized anyway, and that's partly driven by their relationship with banking institutions and things of that nature. Well, banking institutions and the financial marketplace was where these payroll protection loans went through. And so if you already have a situation where
All right, a little bit of trouble with Henry's feed there, but I think the data kind of speaks for itself. And
can I just follow up on that, Leslie?
Sure.
Because I think part of what Henry was going to say was, because he and I have talked about this a number of times. I often tell people that there's a difference between having a banking relationship and having a bank account. And so for many diverse business owners, minority in particular, they have bank accounts all over the place. But the challenge is you don't necessarily have a banking relationship. So here these banks are with access to these PPP resources, and the first type of customer they're going to support are those that they have a relationship with first. They already have a credit card with that company. They already have a small business loan with that company. They may have a car loan with that company, and so on and so on. Let's shore up that business first, because we don't want to have defaults on our exposure already, and then we'll serve others. And in the process of that, many of the diverse companies that just had a bank account didn't get serviced. They just didn't get to them before the money ran out, Combine that with many of those smaller, diverse-owned businesses were very skeptical of PPP dollars because it said forgivable. So what I was hearing on the street, at least initially, was, well, forgivable means it might not be forgiven. So what do we do if I've lost 30% of my revenue? I'm being asked to take out a loan that might be forgiven, but suppose it's not. How do I repay this loan? And that's part of what I heard consistently. We put it in a report and shared that with the governor's office, and they responded with grant dollars that we could put on the street for these small, diverse business owners to help in that situation. So I think that was the other challenge that we saw.
Yeah, I want to get to that in just a second. I'll come right back to you. But Henry, I wanted to have a chance for you to finish your point. Kevin's been talking about some of the reasons why that inequity might have manifested. Any thoughts about what's happened since then? Do you think that that's still going on, or have some of those problems been addressed over the past few months?
Well, so sorry about whatever the internet connection, but I think I mean, really, you gotta understand where we were kind of looking at the demographics of the business before the pandemic hit, right? I mean, I think that's the important understanding. I mean, that you're already talking about communities that were, undercapitalized and challenges. And as, Kevin mentioned before, what we see with recessions always is kind of this kind of dichotomy between businesses laying off people and entrepreneurs starting up and things like that. And the question becomes, well, those new firms that start up, do they grow, right? Do they grow, and do they start hiring people? Do they remain as sole proprietorships? One of the challenges with minority businesses, particularly African-American businesses, is that a lot of those businesses were sole proprietorships, and there were certain challenges as related to even getting access to PPP based on the rules of the payroll protection in terms of paperwork and forms and things of that nature, even if you really had a legitimate business. And so since then, I think that certainly the Congress and others have, they in the second round of PPP, they put out on the street, they kind of directed the institutions to focus on those underrepresented businesses. Now, there's some data that shows that even when they did that, it didn't kind of, as much of it didn't hit the streets as they wanted to. But I say that to say that, I mean, I think that, the underlying foundation of the challenges that so many businesses had that are diverse before the pandemic, they were really just exacerbated by the pandemic. And so since then, I think there's still a whole lot of things that we have to figure out as it relates to how do we invest in that infrastructure going forward. And so, this was I think a critical time to understand really just how gaping those holes are.
So Kevin, some progress with the PPP program, but you've also been doing some work on a program called Retool NC. Can you talk about how maybe that's addressing some of the challenges that the PPP program faced and helping small businesses in the state?
Well, I think part of what we saw was this gap between those who, were not able to get a loan from a bank but needed support. And for those that were also skeptical of a loan, they wanted more grant dollars that could shore up their business for a short amount of time. And so the state, along with Carolina Small Business Development Fund and the Institute, developed Retool NC as a way of responding to that need throughout the state. And so the governor's office set aside about $12 million for us to share with diverse businesses, those that were HUB or DBE certified across the state. We started that the first week of October, and by Thanksgiving, we had given all of those dollars away to over 500 businesses across the state. And then the governor came back and said, wow, I had no idea you all were going to put the money on the street that fast. So here's another $1 million. Can you put that out before the end of the year? And we disseminated that in 2 weeks. And so we know the need is out there. Just the Institute, we provided over 350 grants to these diverse businesses, but we had over 1,700 requests. And so even with another round, our thought was, do we really need to open it back up for that request number to swell even further, or just continue to work with those that are already in the pipeline and support them, because the need hasn't gone away. So even though we see things opening back up, we see people wanting to get back out and take their mask off and all of those things, diverse businesses are still hurting. We're still seeing some being lost because they've held on as long as they could, but time is running out for many of them.
Byron, the SBTDC has worked with businesses all across the state. I'm guessing you're seeing some of that same capacity issue. Those that have capacity are better able to access loans than those that aren't, right? I mean, that
right. And I agree with what Kevin and Henry were saying about this. Is a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs are just debt averse. They're just scared to take on debt. Well, if you take that uncertainty we were talking about earlier and throw that on top of that and say, well, we're going to loan you money to save your business. They don't even know when the revenue is going to start back. They don't know when the sales are going to start back. Why do they even want to take on a loan? So once the grant programs became available, it did really help. But I still think that there was some disparity in where they were getting delivered, as we mentioned earlier. And we saw that across the state. We have very good coverage out of our 11 regional centers all around the state to serve all counties. But we actually ended up seeing majority of our client requests for assistance coming from the urban areas. I don't know if that was a product of going virtual in a virtual world, and we've talked about broadband around the state in the rural areas, or just access to information was just as critical as access to the money. And I'm not sure the information was getting to those that needed it all the time. I was on a call with the SBA partners yesterday, including some of Kevin's folks from the Women's Business Center, and they were talking about that there was so much information flooding the market that people didn't know what was right and what wasn't. And they got a little apprehensive about some of the information they were receiving. But during COVID, we were actually able to obtain some of the CARES Act funding to increase our capacity to serve businesses in North Carolina. And we were able to bring on about 25 extra counselors that all worked remote to serve clients around the state. Just the work they did is on your screen now. So that is only from the folks that came in really indicating they had a COVID issue. We looked at it from our organization. Anybody that called us last year had a COVID issue, whether they said it or not. Business was affected tremendously. But we were able to help people navigate through those really challenging government documents. And that's another thing to what Kevin and Henry were saying about the process. Going through that process, if you haven't borrowed money as a business owner before, trying to complete a government form 5460 from SBA, that just blows people away. So we tried to offer as much assistance as possible and helped just numerous folks with that. A lot of the activity came through our HBCU hosted centers, and but we would have liked to have done more and reached more people.
If you are a small business owner who has a story to tell, please feel free to share it in the comments section, whether you're on Facebook Live or YouTube or LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you if you're someone who's worked for a small business over the past year and have ideas or questions. We'd love to hear from you on that as well. Comment from Greg in chat over Facebook saying there's picking up on earlier comment. There's a difference between having a banking relationship and a bank account as it relates to having a business and having access to resources. And I think on some level, I think you're all agreeing that that's kind of a natural tendency, that you're going to want to give the loan to the person who you've been in a relationship with in the past. But the question is, how do we address that so that is different in the future? I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about that. What are some of the skills that small business owners maybe didn't have before this that they have now realized that they need to have going forward to make them more resilient in a situation like this, or as the world continues to change really quickly.
Well, I can offer some, and I think that it's it's I was a banker as well early at the beginning of my career, and I was a banker in the mid '90s, just as what we know the Glass-Steagall Act to be, and you started interstate banking, and so I used to work for. You've been in North Carolina long enough, Central Carolina Bank, and I bring that up because there really was relational banking back then, right? I mean, banking was really about the community and people. You knew your borrowers. I mean, you maybe went to church with them, went to high school with them, and you knew them. And then as banks started growing bigger, things have become more transactional. And I think that's one of the challenges, in terms of in this kind of day and age of transactional banking. How do you build those relationships? And so, part of it, I think, is working on both sides, right? Part of it is working with the entrepreneurs and kind of helping them navigate through this issue of, build relationships before you need it, right? Don't wait till you actually need it. I think on the other side is also making sure that the institutions are, having casting their net wider to make sure they try to, build these relationships with more diverse entrepreneurs and things of that nature. I think Kevin said it right. I mean, if you think about it from a standpoint of self-interest, if I have a group of people that have loans with me and all of a sudden the economy shuts down, I mean, kind of who am I going to look out to try to figure out how I'm going to help? And I think that's a key aspect of this, this was such a unique circumstance, right? We go through recessions, but I mean, we haven't been through a situation where it was a health-induced pandemic that created the shutdown, and simultaneously it shut down all over the whole world. I mean, usually recessions happen in certain places or in certain sectors, and I mean, not everything all at one time across the world. And I think that just created a unique circumstance of kind of a perfect storm that just exposed a whole lot of things that I think a lot of us knew were there, but it just exacerbated themselves.
I think I would add to that, add to Henry and say that, the uniqueness and the importance of having an SBTDC network, as well as the Women's Business Centers network across the state, has been invaluable during this pandemic. And so for people to not know where to turn for support, for help, genuine support and help, in a way we're not charging them fees, we're trying to help them navigate these waters and come out of it successfully. And so there were lots of folks that hung shingles out and said, we can help you for a small fee, that $9.99, we can help you. And a lot of people out of desperation got caught up in that. And then they would come to us and say, we just need help. We feel like we don't know where to turn for real solutions on how to navigate these waters. And then we start talking about how to reposition your business the way a bank needs to see it so you can have access to resources, whether that's credit, whether that is, do you have a P&L that you can share, balance sheets and all those things. What are your projections? And people say, projections? We're in a pandemic. My projection is to survive. And we're like, no, you got to do more than just survive. We got to think you're going to get out of this. You got to think beyond that. Assure me that you're going to get past that, your financial source. And so that's the calming down, I think, that you get from the SBTDC network, from the Women's Business Centers network. And, the other thing I would say is for a lot of the male-owned businesses, they would see Women's Business Center and they would say, well, they're not there to help me. Not true. The Women's Business Centers, that's a term that the SBA said we had to call them. But they help men-owned companies as well as women-owned businesses. We can't turn anyone away. So we ended up helping all types of people through that process. So that's what I would suggest is there's a network out there of those that have credibility, who really do want to help businesses. It's just a matter of getting in that network and letting us help you navigate.
That's a great point, Leslie. If you don't mind, I'll jump in on that. You also have to realize all of the resource partners had to find a new way to do business. All of us had our offices. People knew where our offices were. They knew where the Women's Business Center was, the Small Business Center at the community college. They knew where they could go. Well, we were all shut down too. This was our way of communicating. We had to set up Zooms all the time for this. So it was just a new way of doing business, even for those of us that are supporting the small businesses.
Kevin and Byron, I wonder, you've seen so many businesses over the past year. I wonder if you could single out one or two that you think have just been brilliant at navigating their way through this. And it could be, doesn't matter what sector, but if you could just think about maybe a business or a business owner who you feel like has really just shined during this time, and maybe what principles you can extract from the way that person made it through. And a little bit later, we can talk in general about those that have not made it. So Byron, maybe you could start and just talk about a business that you're aware of that you think has really impressed you during the past year.
Sure. We had one client that was a gym owner or a fitness center. And think about that. Those just shut down. Boom. What do you do? And working with one of our counselors, he was able to pivot and start focusing on nutrition. And while people were at home, they were able to get his assistants online, and he turned his business into a whole different model where he was started focusing on offering nutritional advice for people while they're at home instead of coming to his gym. And he did receive a PPP and an EIDL loan to help him carry through, but he ended up going after a contract with a professional sports team offering nutritional catering. That was never on his radar pre-pandemic to do that kind of work. So really it's that story of saying, okay, I've got to survive. What is the market that I can serve under these conditions? And then can I make any money doing it? So that was a neat story to see somebody, especially we've heard all about the gyms and the fitness centers closing. And that was a great way to pivot, to look at a new market, to find new customers.
I think of one, Leslie, in Charlotte, and I've known them for a number of years. One was a photographer, the other did some branding, personal branding, and when the pandemic hit, they got married. So that was the first thing. Talk about pivoting. So they got married, and then they changed the business model completely. So it wasn't just about doing photography. It was now, how do we support people with personal branding? So a lot of people were getting laid off, and they're now thinking through their business, their personal business strategy. Do I look for another job? Do I set up my own business? And then how do I do that? How do I market myself? And so here they were, perfectly positioned. Everybody's at home, they're working from home. How do I now set your personal brand up virtually so that you're marketable, whether it is to get another job or to start your own business and promote your business? So I think the two of them merging together, talk about merger, and creating a new business model that they could then use to support others who are pivoting personally and professionally, I thought was ingenious.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add in something on that particular conversation. Actually, here in Durham, one of the things that happened early on is that, again, I mean, things just shut down completely, and kind of everybody went to their own kind of corners. From a community standpoint, one of the things that really a group of us worked on, and it was really, I think, a testament to how a community can come together, is we know that, for example, whenever schools shut down, whether we're talking about like now summertime or other issues, there are a group of young kids who just don't have access to food, right? I mean, you're talking missing 2 meals out of their 3 meals a day. And so one of the things that we worked on in Durham was to kind of create some connective tissue around that issue, whereby you take and work with small restaurants who are losing their customers from a standpoint of walk-ins and dine-ins to cater food. We raise money from the community to actually pay for those foods, or from the school system, and then you have a system set up where families can come and get food, kind of on a daily basis. And so that was a way to keep, kids fed and families fed, also keep revenue coming into the these restaurants so that they can survive, because we know how tough restaurants were hit. And so I think that was just one of those things that ended up, having to figure out, creatively, how do you address these issues by kind of creating a bridge between, certain groups.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have a question from Greg over Facebook, and he's basically making the point that we're talking about. We've been talking a lot about businesses of a certain size, but a lot of businesses are smaller, with 0 or 1 employees. And we saw earlier a slide, I think, that showed that an overwhelming portion of small businesses in North Carolina have 0 or 1 employees. Are there any resources for startups, freelancers, independent contractors, or is it only those that have employees and full organizations? What's available to that really small business with 0 or 1 employees?
When you're talking about, are you talking about just resources or capital? A couple of different things, but there are a lot of resources in the small business ecosystem to support sole proprietors or even startups. Like we mentioned earlier, we've seen thousands of starts in 2020. But the Community College Small Business Center Network is a great opportunity, especially for those sole proprietors, to take classes at no cost to help them be better at QuickBooks or how to run their business. And then the SBTDC offers counseling to those as well. And I know the Women's Business Center, as Kevin mentioned, there are a lot of resources for those. The challenge comes in when we go back and talk about the capital that was available for those. Most of the capital mechanisms are based on cash flow of businesses, not on a person's basically lifestyle business. And a lot of the sole proprietors, it's a lifestyle business. That's what's funding their mortgage, their car payment. That's also what's driving the business as well. So the resources for funding are a little bit more challenging for those.
And what we know is 90% of diverse business owners are sole proprietors.
Right.
Henry, let me ask you about, we've talked a little bit about the new skills maybe that existing businesses and entrepreneurs might need to have. You sit you sit many places, but one of the places you sit is at NC Central and have close ties to the business school. And I'm wondering whether there are new skills that business students need to be being equipped with, or changes that business programs at universities might need to be making to get people ready to graduate into this world that, is pretty different from what we thought it was a year ago or a year and a half ago.
Oh yeah, well certainly, yeah. I lead the entrepreneurship program at North Carolina Central University in Durham, and certainly, this last year or so has been a testament to all of us in terms of trying to figure out, what do we want to make sure our students leave out of university with, because, as Byron said just perfectly at the very beginning, I mean, we all thought it was going to be a couple of months, and so we shut down like everybody else at a university, and basically over spring break in 2020, and so okay, well, it'll be for the rest of the semester, and then we'll see everybody in fall, and that didn't happen, and so one of the things that we had to kind of navigate because we all got thrown into this Zoom world, this virtual world, kind of all of a sudden. So I think certainly from a standpoint of, I think there's some benefits to that, right? That we all kind of got thrown into this world, unexpectedly. Also, I think if you look at some of the investments that are being focused on for the rural parts of the state to kind of bring them online, and that infrastructure, I think from an equity standpoint can be very important. If now, businesses that are not in the urban areas can compete. But to your question, one of the things that I've certainly spoken to my students about has been just the sheer need to understand how to adapt very quickly, right? I mean, in terms of just that you can't really just sit back and just wait for the world to come back to some regular order. I mean, you got to figure out how to navigate that. So I think certainly being more, flexible and learn to adapt to these broader issues that happen in society as a business, because we all have to figure that out, right? I mean, we don't control everything. And so just making sure that's honed in on the students that you can't have a normal, something happens and then just sit there and wait for the normal to come back. You have to kind of be able to pivot. I say the other part of it is certainly the importance of, even utilization of technologies and things in businesses, and being able to have different ways by which you operate. So we talked about restaurants earlier. And certainly, I think one of the things that caught, it could just be small restaurants, it could be diverse restaurants, but even the ability to have an online presence where people could they could order food, you could connect to these DoorDashes and Ubers and things of that nature, take credit cards or debit cards online. I mean, those things ended up, being very crucial. And so I think just making sure that we're preparing future business leaders and entrepreneurs to understand all of that, and that becomes a part of, just like legal or accounting or whatever, these contingency strategies and diversification of how you do business just becomes that much more critical in the current day and age.
We've talked a little bit about what happened, and we've talked a little bit about what's happening, but I wonder whether we might be able to look forward. And I just have a couple more slides that have a little bit of information about what businesses are thinking it's going to take in terms of recovery for them. So if you look at, this is a U.S. Census Small Business Pulse survey that came out a couple of weeks ago and asked small businesses, when do you think you will get back to normal? And 20% said we're already back to normal. 17% said maybe 4 to 6 months. About a third said it's going to be more than 6 months, and 7% said never back to normal. And there's some other categories in there, but those are the big ones. And then if you ask them what sort of help they need, that was the second question. And they found, this is just the North Carolina respondents for this one, number one need by far right now is finding employees. So those that are trying to hire are scrambling right now. Some people asking for help with marketing and sales, others looking for new supply chains. So I wonder if you guys could react to either of those data points about what you're hearing from people about time that they think it's going to take to get back to normal, or whether they will get back to normal, and also what kind of challenges businesses are facing as they now try to look forward and figure out where they're going from here.
I guess what I would challenge is, when we say back to normal, we mean going back to the way we used to do things. I would say that we probably shouldn't be thinking that way. That I would suggest we create a new normal and a new way of doing things. And one of the things the pandemic and this economic challenge has hopefully taught us is that we can do things differently. That we probably ordinarily would not have done, just because it was just easier to continue to do what we were doing. And for many people, it's, you're change averse. So you don't really know what change means, but we know this works. So let's just continue to do what we're doing. And the pandemic forced us to change and do things differently. And now we're finding that, well, this isn't so bad. We can do this just as well, if not more efficiently, because we've had to. And so now it's just thinking through what that new normal looks like. I've heard many businesses, corporations are saying, do we really need everybody to return back to the office? Can you continue to work virtually and be just as productive, if not more productive? Do we really need as many employees? Can we bring in more technology? So I think those are a lot of things that we're grappling with at this point, versus thinking of, do we try to hold on to what we used to do sometime pre-pandemic?
A lot of concern about employees, and I'm wondering what you guys are hearing about that. The General Assembly last week took some action that they thought might get people in, sort of suggesting that one reason people were not as willing to go back into the workforce was that they were getting too much money in relief funds. And so taking some steps to limit the amount of benefit someone could get who's not working. That's at least one solution, or one proposed solution to one perception of the problem. But that's a large number of businesses who say they're having trouble finding employees. What's the employee challenge right now?
You may have stumped us all on that one, Leslie. I don't think we know. I think it's just it's the perfect storm of a lot of things. Like we talked about earlier, some people found other opportunities to make money last year. They don't want to go back to serving tables and waiting tables in the restaurant because they found another way to make money. I don't know if it's necessarily the unemployment assistance. I'm sure that's a portion. But I would think overall it was people thinking differently about just their lifestyle, their revenue they need to live on, and where they can get that. Because to see unemployment as low as it is, but yet here 41% or whatever it is of folks still are looking to hire, it's just a weird situation for everyone out there. I think it's a shift of the workforce. I think some of the working from home, like Kevin said, are people going to do that? Are they going to get paid to do that still? So I just think there's a lot of opportunities for work. It's a question of whether or not it now matches up with what their personal goals are.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that because, I mean, that's actually the question I probably get asked the most these days is about that situation with, small businesses and not being able to find employees and things of that nature. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Byron just said. I think I've also seen people who, you go through this pandemic and you spend, so many months in your house and you're not being able to see family and things. I mean, I've seen people just think totally different about their life. I mean, do I really want to be doing this versus that, or do I want to, take the bull by the horn and things of that nature? And so I do think people really have reassessed, where they are in this world, and and again, I think that it's a much more complicated situation than simply some of the benefits that we see now. Certainly, one of the things I say to this point is that, I mean, I think you have to assess, okay, if you can make more, with the $300 additional unemployment than you could have in the workforce, how do we really, take a deep dive into understanding, livable wages and things of that nature as it relates to the workforce. I think we have to look at all sides of this and think about how do we adjust to that. And so, yeah, I think that this is a time that will, really force us to think about our economy in different ways than we would have had otherwise.
Any thoughts on what sorts of small businesses might grow out of this, or which kinds of small businesses maybe that were a smaller part of the larger picture before that maybe are going to spring up as a result of this? What are some niches of opportunity that you're beginning to see for small businesses that maybe didn't exist before?
Well, I will say that one thing, as Greg said in the chat earlier, was about freelancers and independent contractors. I think we're going to see even more of the service industry supported by those type folks. Like we were saying earlier, do corporations reduce their workforce, but then take on the contractors that can freelance, sitting at their home kitchen table? They have a potential to have more customers, make more money. The corporation doesn't carry the overhead. I think that's where we're going to see a service change in how we're providing the freelance, the independent contractors, those services to big and small business.
Yeah, I certainly think I agree with that as well. I mean, I've been amazed at the growth of these kind of Uber Eats and things of that nature, right? I mean, just the simplicity of hitting the button and saying, "Oh, well, somebody bring me, some hamburger or French fry." I mean, it's just the smallest thing, and so I think that, certainly, that convenience piece, right? I mean, because you can simply at this point you can basically order anything you can on online. I mean, they go to a box chain and pick it up for you. They go to a drugstore and pick it up for you. I mean, so a lot of these things are things that that society had talked about. This kind of futuristic that are here. I do think of I was in the DC area the last couple of days, and one of the things that is striking me is because of the continued growth of technology and the utilization of it. I think that's the service work around like cybersecurity will continue to grow. We've seen what went on with the pipeline and now beef and things of that nature. And so I'm convinced that that's going to continue to grow as we go more and more online. And particularly, one of the questions is, well, where does small business fall in that, right? I mean, in terms of protection of their own data and their own systems and things like that. So there's always opportunity that comes out of, new shifts, as Kevin called it, the new normal.
And just to piggyback on that, Henry, I think what that also means is we got to make sure broadband is widely available across our state. As people begin to shift and pivot, they need to have access to a way to shift and pivot so they're not locked out of what will become the new normal, those new opportunities. There's some brilliant people across the state, from the coast to the mountains. And we got to make sure they have access so that they are part of our economic system. And so broadband is going to be hugely important to that as we move more and more into technology. We got to make sure everybody is contributing to that process and feels like they have access to it.
Well, I think to that point, one of the interesting dynamics that has come about in this is, we're seeing community states and other places who are actually now, they're pivoting some of their marketing to people to have people move to that state and work remotely, right? You see, I think like West Virginia was offering $10,000 for people to relocate to West Virginia. I'd been doing some work in Hawaii, and they had like, you could stay here for like free for like 6 months if you can. I mean, but it actually makes you think about kind of what that could mean for these kind of more remote economies, right? If people shifted to those places, and what you want to be bringing money from outside, right? I mean, and so those people bringing money from outside, they're in the community. They're building this kind of, community body politic, and now you need services for those people, right? Whether it be restaurants or things like that. And so, I mean, it really could really shift how we think about economic development in communities, and particularly if we can get that broadband to a point where you don't have the lapse of services across the state. So I think North Carolina, I mean, it would be wonderful if there was a way to, spread some of the wealth across the state by thinking about how people can set up, shop in these places if they don't have to go into the office, and then how that then spurs entrepreneurship related to those new local economies.
It's interesting. I think you're beginning to see economic development pivot a little bit from recruitment of companies to recruitment of people. And you've talked about some of the incentive programs that states are coming up with. I know in North Carolina, we've been working with the town of Elkin that's been kind of interested in recruiting people. Wilkes County has been interested in recruiting people. Carteret County has developed a strategy that's part of its economic development system. And as Kevin said, it hinges off of broadband. You want people to be able to be remote workers or to start their own companies. Wilson has had some success with using their broadband network to recruit people who could live anywhere, who might choose now to live in Wilson. And if we can figure out a way to do it equitably, that could make a tremendous difference. Let me just ask each of you as we close to think about if you could change one policy that might encourage more small business. And it could either be pandemic related or it could be more general than that. It's one thing we need to change if we're going to have a more robust small business system here in North Carolina.
Well, like I said, as a former banker, as they say, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so, I think access to capital continues to be a crucial, but not just any capital. I do think equity matters, right? And I think finding ways to, particularly finding ways for small businesses to be able to compete and get access to equity. Because I think we all love the big announcements and to show that the state is a place that these major corporations want to come and be a part of. But I think there's still some tremendous things that need to happen that for these smaller businesses that are already here, they're trying to grow, and how do they get resources and access to capital, equity, and the right policies to allow them to grow as well. So I think kind of how we do that is important going forward.
Kevin, I'm giving you a temporary magic wand here you can wave. What would you do with it?
I think I would, part of what we talked about with the under-hires task force gets at what Henry was mentioning around not just focusing on how we recruit businesses to North Carolina, but also support those that are in the state with capital so they can grow. And that capital being somewhat on parity with access to capital if you're a large corporation. And there are examples across the country where states have responded to support smaller businesses within their community. I think we've got some opportunity there to engage in more of that activity as a state and provide opportunity there. At the same time, we've got to make sure our citizens are healthy and have access to health care. And, if you don't have a healthy workforce, you're basically going to be doing this on your own, which will limit your ability to scale. So we've got to have a healthy workforce. So as companies grow, there's the workforce there for them to grow and for us to recruit more companies to North Carolina.
Thank you, Byron. One change?
I'm going to fall back on what we talked about earlier, is just with the broadband, but digital marketing for our small businesses. If you notice, that was one of the things that in the survey was marketing. A lot of our small businesses, they're in your neighborhood. You go by there every day. That's where you go to get your hair cut. That's where you stop in the market. They didn't have a digital presence. When the world went virtual, they got left out. So I would like to see community support that virtual digital presence of small businesses, a platform where they could be, have their Uber Eats would find them on there and different things. So I'd like to see a more robust, I think a lot of small businesses get left off of this.
All right. That's the final word. Byron Hicks, Executive Director of Small Business Technology Development Center, Kevin Price, President and CEO of the Institute, Dr. Henry McCoy, many things, but among them, Director of Entrepreneurship at NC Central University. Thank you all for being with us. Really appreciate your comments and thoughts and the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
That is our show for today. First in Future is produced by James Herrick. It's built off of an idea by Greg Hedgepeth. We've had help today from Kirsten Chang, who helps get the word out about the show. Research from Simone Coleman. Renee Potts helped with our slides. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. If you like the show, tell a friend. We'll post this video on YouTube. We'll have audio on our website, emergingissues.org, for this and all our past shows. We're going to be back in 2 weeks, June 22nd at 9 to 10 a.m. We hope you'll join us for our next conversation. For all of us at NC State's Institute for Emerging Issues, we really appreciate your being with us. I'm Leslie Boney. We'll see you in the future.